Hello, troublemakers. Welcome to this week's episode of Resolved Labor Podcast. This week, we will be highlighting Jonathan Melrod. Jonathan Melrod was born June 10th, 1950. Shout out to the Geminis. He was born to Leonard and Miriam Melrod, who were both from Newark, New Jersey. Leonard was a shoe salesman who became a self-taught attorney. He didn't have money for tuition, so he convinced the students at the university to open the window above the door so he could hear the professor's lectures and take notes. And as a testament to his resolve, Leonard met and married a woman many agreed was out of his league, Miriam. When Jonathan was 6, the family moved to a large Jewish middle-class neighborhood on the northwest quadrant of D.C. By all accounts, life was simple and safe for John. He would ride his bike and play basketball at the community center where his dad was the coach. John had his first bout with anti-Semitism when his mother sent a note to his teacher stating that John, then in the second or third grade, said that he wasn't allowed to rehearse Christmas songs with the class because of their Jewish heritage. Jonathan remembers the teacher going ham and yelling, Mr. Melrod, I understand you won't be with the rest of the class when we share holiday with the elderly. Then she made him drag his wooden desk out into the hallway so that the rest of the students could gawk at him. When John was 10 or 11, he witnessed whites pour bleach into the community pool when blacks tried to have it desegregated. He says it was then that he realized that some white people felt, quote, disdain and challenged by blacks, even if they were kids. At the age of 14, John was sent to Putney Boarding School in Vermont. The Putney School is an independent progressive high school that was formed in 1935. It's a boarding school, but it also has a day student component. John remembers the other students were sophisticated and artsy and well-versed in all things politics. He stood out and remembers thinking, why did my parents send me to a school on a farm? But John soon adopted a new and exciting vision of how his generation could create a new world built on compassion and humanity. Same, John, same. He read about revolutions breaking out in Latin America and Africa. He and his friends grew their hair long, wore, bright colored bell bottoms. And of course, they smoked gold colored weed called Acapulco Gold. So, troublemakers, Acapulco Gold is a strand of cannabis, the weed, that was popular during the 1960s counterculture movement for its potency and, unique color. It was first recorded in the United States in 1964, and it was described by the Oxford English Dictionary as a, quote, special grade of cannabis growing in the vicinity of Acapulco with a color of brownish gold or a mixture of gold and green, end quote. It was called the connoisseur pot in the 1960s. It was sought after marijuana for American smokers, and it was considered better quality than the weed growing in California or Texas. So just so you know, troublemakers, I am not endorsing nor am I sponsored by Acapulco Gold. Word on the street is that you can still get it. But, again, I'm not here to say whether you should do it or not. But if you do, let me know how it goes. John became caught up in the political and cultural revolution of the 60s. He and his friends, they vehemently, opposed the Vietnam War and, avidly supported the civil rights movement. After graduation, John headed to University of Wisconsin-Madison, that he describes as, a hotbed of youthful countercultural rebellion. In his first week, he enthusiastically embraced Students for Democratic Society. At the time, it was a nationwide organization with tens of thousands of members on 300 campuses. Hell yes. John lived and breathed politics. His first week on campus, he and his friends, they organized and they were able to, get the university to discontinue mandatory attendance for the ROTC indoctrination class. While a lot of kids were walking around partying and being carefree kids, Jon and his friends, they would go from room to room and try to get people to protest the war and join SDS. Jon was also inspired by Chairman Fred Hampton of the Black Panther Party in Chicago. And he volunteered to coordinate the sales of the Panther paper and sell them, around the Madison area in Wisconsin. In January 1972, he left Madison and went to Milwaukee. Along with, thousands of other students in the country, he just went and got a job. He landed a job at the American Motors Corporation, AMC, working on the auto assembly line. His first days on the line were tough, and he remembers, that he was not in Kansas anymore, and he was no longer an easy and carefree student. At first he didn't think he could physically tolerate the hourly, daily abuse of the assembly line, but 60 days in, he completed his probationary period and became a proud member of UAW Local 75. He loved working, and having camaraderie day in and day out with the hundreds of people that worked there. And he really enjoyed, fighting back against the monotony of being chained to the assembly line, with colored workers and particularly those back from Vietnam. Jon and some other co-workers formed a militant rank and file caucus called Fight Back because union leadership there at the plant and the company, they were trying to force the workers to work Saturday overtime. It was a forced overtime on Saturdays, and they were challenging this new speed up policy that the company had implemented. So they were able to fight back on that front, and management basically, it pissed them off, of course, and so they did what all bad workers do. They contacted the FBI, yes, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, for guidance because they wanted to crush the militant, fuck you rebellion. And so they called the FBI, and the FBI, they decided to do an investigation, because the AMC, the management, their complaint was there is a group of new employees who are banding together and are trying to create work stoppages. So the FBI and management concurred, and what they came back is that Jonathan Melrod is attempting to organize a caucus. Within days of the FBI memo coming out, the plant guards came to Jon's assignment and they drug his ass down the stairs and threw him out the door. You're fired. He was fired and he left. He said, you know what? This is not the last time you guys are going to see Jon Melrod. So he filed a complaint with the National Labor Relations Board, and after 2.5 years, he walked back into the plant with both middle fingers in the air because he won his job back. In the summer of 1976, the job was transferred to Kenosha, and Jon, quickly became friends with two political activists there, John Drew and Todd Onstad, and they pulled together and they started a newsletter called Fighting Times, and they formed a rank and file caucus and UAW Local 75. So at first the Kenosha guys weren't real keen on Jon, and they didn't really fuck with him real hard. So of course, they were naturally protective of their jobs because you got these outsiders that are transferring in. So now that disrupts seniority and all kinds of stuff, if you guys have ever experienced something like that. So Jon, he moved to Racine so he could be closer to the plant and so that he could get to know some of his local 72 members better. He threw himself into the economic and political struggles, and at the core of his beliefs, at the forefront of the Fighting Times platform was the struggle against white chauvinism and racism and second-class treatment of women, both on the shop floor and within the ranks of the union and in society. Who else doesn't fucking love this guy right now? So this rank and file caucus that John was one of the leaders, they didn't just talk the talk, they walked the walk. Like they would sign up for protests and they would go and march, for civil rights. And in one instance, they, chartered a bus and a bunch of members signed up to go to a protest against the Ku Klux Klan in Tupelo, Mississippi. So John and his friends, they hopped on the bus. They went so they could help out with the protest, and they passed out 5,000 copies of their newsletter. In 1984, along with Todd and John Drew, the membership elected all of them to the Executive Board Bargaining Committee. And, this was a dream come true for John because he had always wanted to be on the board in a leadership position where he felt like he could influence the policies and practices of the union. So when Renault, another company that owned AMC, threatened to close the plant and move the production to France, the E-Board had to face the toughest negotiations in the locals' 50-year history. Now, they understood that the French plant was capable of producing the same models that they made, but just the challenge, they knew that they were playing with fire, but they felt like it was incumbent that they pushed back against the company's threats of closures. So in a show of solidarity, the E-Board and the local 72 membership voted not to be stampeded into concessions, but to fight tooth and nail. Like every day, John felt the weight of having, the livelihoods of 43,000 workers and their families and their pensions, in his hands. So after a high stakes negotiation, the E-Board, they agreed to some concessions that brought their contract in line with those of the big three. The big three being GM, Ford, Chrysler. And it was a step backward for them. And, he wasn't good with it, but, everybody eventually learned to live with it. It was really tough for him. He was opposed to the concessions, but, just for the safety of everybody, he had to make this educated decision, understanding the facts behind the fact that Renault, behind their threat to move production. At the age of 35, John decided to leave Kenosha and go to the University of California, Hastings College of Law, with the intent to practice labor law. He went out there not knowing a soul. It was cold as hell in San Francisco that summer, and he didn't have a dime in his name. He slogged it out in law school, and he graduated, but it was a miserable experience that he highly does not recommend. Rather than labor law, though, he chose to practice refugee and asylum law, where he represented hundreds of clients from around the world seeking safety from persecution. John really embraced this work. He saw it as a new avenue for continuing the struggle to improve, the plight of the world's most endangered refugees. So this is my favorite part of the story, Troublemakers. Like, John is 35 years old, and he decides to pick up, and go somewhere else to reinvent himself. And that's the part where, I can appreciate that it's never too late to get up and do something different and reinvent yourself and, embrace life. So in June of 2000, on the night of his 50th birthday, John's health took a turn for the worse. His small and large intestines were carpeted with an extensive colony of precancerous polyps. And within days, he was having a major surgery on a large portion of his intestines, including the sphincter muscle. It was cut out. And then a staph infection set in, and it took months before he regained his ability to walk and function. Over the next 4 years, he was repeatedly hospitalized with excruciating intestinal blockages. He said he felt like his health hung in the balance daily, but he would just grin and bear it. He said at work, his head would lay on a desk, and he frequently sprinted to the restroom. In 2004, he was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. but he refused to accept the surgeon's death sentence, vowing to not leave his sons, who were very young at the time, Eli and Noah, 10 and 7, without a father. He promised to attend their bar mitzvahs, see them off to college, and with any luck, maybe even be around a little bit longer. Part of John's self prescribed therapy was to leave behind the streets, traffic, and concrete of San Francisco. And then in 2007, he separated from his wife, Susan. I don't know, I guess Susan was part of the self prescribed therapy, getting rid of Susan, but today they're really close friends. And he moved to Sonoma County. He focused on recovery and developing a healthy, stress-free lifestyle. He made a point that he was going to write his memoirs, and he was hoping to leave a legacy for Eli and Noah, of his lifetime commitment to the struggle against oppression and for a just and equitable society. In 2014, Jon was pronounced cancer-free. Shout out to Jon. In October of 2013, a 13-year-old Latino boy named Andy Lopez was gunned down by Sonoma County Sheriff's Deputy Eric Galehouse, just miles from where Jon lived. While on patrol, Galehouse observed Andy carrying a plastic toy gun. He opened fire, killing Andy within 3 seconds. The Santa Rosa Latino community erupted with thousands of youth, taking it to the streets and demanding justice for their friend, calling on the DA to hold Galehouse accountable for murder. Jon could not stand silently by on the sidelines. Understanding the dynamics of spontaneous rebellion after 40 years as a political activist, Jon, got up and, he saw the need for organization to sustain and advance the struggle. He helped to spearhead the formation of the Justice Committee for Andy Lopez. And for the next few years, the JCAL pursued every avenue available, from militant street demonstrations to school walkouts to petitions to packing the county board meetings to legal actions to appeals to the state's attorney general, Kamala Harris, who at that time rebuffed every attempt seeking her intervention to punish Galehouse for murder and to win justice for Andy. Jon led several protests out here about this injustice. Like, he could be seen and heard on the megaphone yelling "Jailhouse for Galehouse" at several protests. Galehouse skated by with a promotion to sergeant while the county, quote, compensated Andy's family with a little over $3 million. It's just fucked up, and it's just not enough for the loss of a child. Jon realized his skills as an attorney were needed in the face of arrest and constant police harassment of the activists, so he dusted off his law school diploma and re-upped his bar membership. Jon continued to work for the immigrants, in that area, as well as to organize the protests for civil rights in that community. In the summer of 2004, while he was communicating online with a woman from the Philippines, Maria Isabel Lopez, they got together and they kind of started liking each other. And, she sent him a photo of her addressing a mass rally in Manila sponsored by a National Alliance for Women. Now, we all know that, women's lib is Jon's jam. And, in just a rash decision, he was, even though he was questioned by his friends and family, he flew out to Manila to meet this woman. He didn't know at the time that she was actually a TV and film star, and she had actually been crowned Miss Philippines in 1982. So it sounds like, just like Jon's dad, he managed to pull a woman that was absolutely out of his league. On his first visit there, they visited political prisoners in jail. That's one hell of a first date. On June 9th, 2019, Isabel and Jon were married on their property where they now live, and they also share the property with his sons, Eli and Noah. Jon also made good on that promise to write that memoir. He wrote a book called Fighting Times, where he chronicles his groundbreaking contributions to all the social media movements, including, the student movement of the 60s, the civil rights movement, the Black liberation movement, the women's lib movement, the urgent call for police reform, and the transformative labor reform movement. And guess what, troublemakers? I have managed to cop an interview with the Jon Melrod. That's right. We're going to release a special episode of that interview, which is essentially me giving my flowers to Jon in person in this form. And if you guys would like to give flowers to someone you know in the labor movement, please write us. Write us at resolvedlaborpod@gmail.com. Also, don't forget to follow, share, like us on Amazon Music, YouTube, and Spotify. And don't forget to leave a review. As always, peace and solidarity. This week's episode of Resolved Labor Podcast is produced by The Create Place Studio. You can find them on all social media platforms at The Create Place STL. We Won is performed by Joe Jinks and written by John O'Connor. This has been Resolved Labor Podcast. As always, peace and solidarity.
Everybody come and join in the union. Begin. Stand together to overcome soon, and we win.